Iuno is currently rerunning as of patch 3.0, and honestly, she's a better DPS than Augusta at this point, even though Iuno was intended to be her support, and I can prove it. I have a bunch of rotation tech to show you, and a full guide prepared to support my claims with evidence. If you want to know how to build and optimize your Iuno enough that she gets to shine as both one of the best DPS and one of the best buffers in the game, because yes, she does both excellently, then look no further and let's get into it. As a small note, I'll be skipping over her kit overview, since this is a rerun character, so most people should know how she works. If you don't, I'll link the review I wrote for her on Pridwin in the description, which is up to date when it comes to understanding her kit. The rest of the updated info can be found on this guide though, so ideally come back once you read the kit explanation part. So first, let's get started with her echoes. What do you use on her? I'll cover both the DPS build and the buffer build. Pretty simple. In both cases, you always run 3-piece Crown of Valor. As a buffer, particularly without her signature weapon, Moonlight Clouds can be a good idea, but it's definitely more niche, so I wouldn't suggest building it unless you ever plan to use Iuno as a buffer without her signature for some reason. In any case, no matter what, you should run crit on your 4 cost, arrow damage on your 3 costs, attack on your 1 costs. A pretty standard damage focused build overall. When it comes to her substat priority, always prioritize energy regen until you have enough, then crit rate and crit damage will give you the best damage increase as usual, then in order you should go for liberation damage and attack percent, and finally flat attack. Considering energy regen is your top priority, going for an energy regen 2-piece set is a great idea, but if you have enough substats, then just use any arrow damage 2-piece to optimize your damage further. Finally, for her recommended endgame substats, I'm again just stealing this one from Pridwin because hey, that's my work right there. As usual, keep in mind this represents a good quality endgame build. This isn't a minimum to reach, more like an ideal to attain long term. For her skill priority, as usual, get your passives first, then your forte is your biggest priority by far, then your liberation, and after that you can literally stop. The rest of her talents really don't bring her close to any damage. Unless you're using her as DPS, then you can consider leveling her basic a bit too. Everything else gives next to no increase, so it's super skippable. For weapons, here are the calcs for you. To the left is calcs as buffer, to the right is calcs as DPS. You essentially have her signature as her ideal weapon by a good amount, because it just gives her a ton of stats. Then Zhengliao's signature is also a perfectly fine substitute if you have it. After that, it's Zani's signature and then any other 5-star. Ether Strike is also fine if you want to spend money on the Battle Pass, but I would honestly just spare the trouble and go for Pulsation Bracers on the standard banner if you want to go for a more accessible option. Ideally, as DPS, you want her signature for top performance though. Now onto sequences. Realistically, all 3 of her first sequences are the good ones. Her S1 gets her a good amount of energy where you won't need energy regen anymore. On top of that, you get extra attack and interruption resistance on her skills. Also her heavy too, but that literally doesn't matter since you always swap out of it. Her S2 is just a ton of extra damage amplification for herself and for Augusta. Really good for Augusta teams specifically, and for DPS Iuno, otherwise quite skippable. Her S3 is a lot of extra damage amplification on most of the attacks in her rotation, which is good for personal damage. Her S4 and S5 are downright useless because they're super small damage increases, and finally her S6 is a huge personal damage increase and changes her DPS rotation. Though at that point I seriously doubt you're using her as a buffer, so yeah, her rotation just changes. So here are the calculations for you now that I explained what the sequences do. Keep in mind, this is personal damage calculations with buffer on the left and DPS on the right. Every sequence calculation you see on the left is much lower in a team context, except for the S2 with Augusta, since Iuno isn't the majority of the personal damage in those teams. Realistically though, personal damage calculations as DPS can easily be translated into a team context, since Iuno does most of the damage there. A TLDR of her sequences is that Iuno doesn't need or even particularly desire any sequence, but if you had to stop somewhere, I would go to S3 max for DPS to make your Iuno top tier for the next 3 years to come, and to S2 max as a buffer. But go for Augusta sequences first in that case, since Iuno's S2 is mostly intended for Augusta, and her own sequences just give better team value. And as usual, please prioritize Iuno's weapon over any sequence node. Now let's get into Iuno's actual rotation optimizations. Chances are you probably clicked here because you saw the title and skipped forward to this point, so I'll make this short. If you enjoy the content, then please consider subscribing. It's not much effort on your end, but it's a huge help for me. So, Iuno's rotations. She has several of them, depending on if you use her as a buffer or as DPS. She's also very flexible in her combos, so it honestly depends a lot on what you need her to do. I'll be covering absolutely everything. First, let's just tackle the standard buffer rotation step by step. This will tell you most of what you need to know about all of Iuno's rotations. This has a lot of text, so listen carefully. First, we intro into Iuno. You'll see your skill button glowing, and you'll really want to press it because it's glowing and wow, that's so cool. Well, you can if you don't have enough energy regen, but if you have the substats, we will ignore this. Just ult immediately. After that, you can jump to switch to bow mode. Again, if you can, dash cancel the attack that happens there. After that, you can do 3 basic attacks, use your echo at any time, and do 1 skill. But wait, look carefully at that attack. Iuno leaps in the air and shoots projectiles. Well, even if you cancel the attack, as long as the projectiles have been shot, your attack will finish as normal, so we can dash out of this one to finish the animation faster. And we can also cast another skill afterwards. Then your concerto is full, but pause again. Normally, Iuno's outro cancels any animation that you start, much like Phoebe's or Linnea's, so it's not possible to swap cancel anything out of it. What that means is that you don't want to swap out of the skill immediately because, well, it's just good damage. However, there is one more thing you can do. Iuno has a special heavy attack that she can cast at full concerto called Absolute Cinema. If you cast this attack and swap, Kuro made a special exception where you can actually swap cancel it for extra damage, healing, stamina recovery, and damage amplification for Augusta specifically. We want the extra damage from that since it's literally free, so you can hold your basic attack button as your skill is about to finish casting, then you swap, and there you go, rotation done. So if we recap everything I just said, we have intro, potentially skill if you need it, then ult, then jump, and immediately dash if you can, then 3 basics, then skill, dash when the projectiles are shot, skill again, heavy attack, swap, outro. That's a lot of tricks. They'll each take a bit of time to learn, but you can genuinely make your Iuno really good if you learn everything that I just taught you. However, that's only as a buffer, and Iuno doesn't limit herself to that. You see, Iuno is also a really good main DPS, because Kuro made her personal damage frankly insane, and her forte has some really unique mechanics you can make use of. We can exploit Iuno's strengths to her advantage, and come up with this DPS rotation. Here, you intro, and you want to cast skill every time. Then, instead of ulting, you jump. You can let this attack finish this time around. Then, you can do 3 basics and a skill, but pause. Normally, the skill consumes 25 forte. You only have 15 in this instance. What happens then? Well, as long as your attacks consume any amount of forte, they'll get the full enhancement. So this skill you're doing right now is actually fully enhanced, giving it the full extra damage and saving on forte. Then, to replenish it a bit, you can then repeat the skill cancel we did before, but this time with her ult. The projectiles will hit the enemy during the ult animation, and you should be able to hear them hit if you did it properly and have your in-game audio on. After that, you can do 3 more basics and 1 more skill, repeating the same pattern from before. Then you have a few options. Now, this is important, so listen carefully. The following trick is going to depend entirely on your team. Normally, Iuno's best team rotation with Linnea and Monnier takes long enough that Iuno can stop right there, cast her heavy attack during her skill as normal, and swap and finish her DPS rotation, because by then your ultimate cooldowns would come up on your supports. However, some supports, for example Shakona or Shorekeeper, will take less time to finish their rotation than that team. In that case, You may be able to squeeze in 1, 2, or even 3 extra unenhanced basic attacks before casting your heavy and finishing your rotation, while still catching your ultimates on cooldown. In that case, you can once again use the dash cancel on the skill to give yourself some time to cast those attacks, actually cast them, and then swap out with your heavy attack as normal. This rotation extension trick is, however, entirely team dependent, as I explained, and you'll need to test it for yourself to see what works for you and what doesn't. Ultimately, your main goal remains to catch your ultimates on their 25-second cooldown. Lastly, for some example teams you can run. Iuno is amazing with several heavy attack damage dealers, but ideally she pairs with Augusta and Shorekeeper. Instead of Augusta, you can also run Jian or DPS Cho Yuan if that guy is S3 or above somehow. Those two teams can work with Shakona instead of Shorekeeper, and even Phoebe Spectre Rover is possible. Galbrena Shorekeeper is possible, it's all viable and should suffice to clear endgame. As a DPS, her ideal team is with Linné and Mornier. If you don't have Mornier, Shakona or Shorekeeper can do. Outside of that, Shakona and Era Rover is her best, but if you don't have access to it, then Yunlin or Jianshin plus Shorekeeper can do. However, the less ideal teammates you have, the more Iuno wants her signature to perform as a DPS, so please keep that in mind. Additionally, while I did say in the intro to this video that Iuno is a better DPS than Augusta, it's only true if there's no temporary endgame buffs related to electro damage or shields, because then Augusta and Iuno are best together, and obviously Iuno will be worse than Augusta on error-resistant enemies. And lastly, in Wuthering Waves, you're much better off running Augusta and Iuno together generally, or even Augusta by herself, since she has much better AoE than Iuno does. Iuno is still usable as a DPS in Wuthering Waves, it's just really not the best team ever. In any case, if I had to give a TLDR of how good Iuno is in the meta, she's stupid good right now. I put her in the high value tier on my pull value tier list, and it's for good reason. With that being said, I'll give you a couple of showcases so you can see for yourself what full team rotations will look like in endgame content. As usual, I won't have any commentary over the gameplay, so that's it for the video. Please like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed. It's not much effort on your end, but it's a huge help for me. And thanks for watching!